just run through more or less points. Because most of what I'm saying you know, but just to take you through quickly about Indian economy, a review of the past, current situation, and how apparently you have taken courses on Indian economy, and some of you have taken on global economy. So what appear to be the problems for global economy, particularly long-term challenges, and I'll focus a little more on the challenges, the strengths of India for the future, the challenges for India for the future. So I'll be focusing a lot more on exploring the future, which is a lot more relevant for you. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. And as I made it clear from the beginning, don't think it will only question from one side and answer from the other side. So it will be a two-way traffic. Okay. Now, as far as the past is concerned, I'm sure some of you must have heard that in 1700, you must have seen, I think, Madison's book, which gives a historical account of the wealth and incomes of various countries of the world. In 1700, India accounted for about 25, one quarter of the world GDP. China accounted for about one quarter. And Japan accounted for about 5%. So these three countries accounted for more of the world GDP than the rest of the world put together. So that is why sometimes they say India and China are not emerging economies, they are simply re-emerging economies. So in the history, 200 years is not much. So that's one perspective. But whatever the reasons, we did not go into the reasons, but we went down and down and down up to 1900. From 1900 to by the 1900, from 25%, India's share became less than 5%. So that is our achievement in 200 years. Then from 1900 to 1950, GDP was growing at 0.9% per annum. Population was growing at 0.8% per annum because a lot of infant mortality. So basically, the per capita GDP was constant for the first half of the 20th century. So when we look at the growth of India after 1950, this background should be kept in view. 200 years down, 50 years this way. Then we got independence. And you have to do political consolidation, social consolidation, and start moving on. That's the background. When people, we have to look at this big picture. Now, then what happened? 1950, people sort of very easily talk of this Indo rate of growth. That's our oversimplification. If you just start looking at 1950, take 50 to 60, 60 to 70, 70 to 80, etc. If you just say, actually 1950 to, except for 65 to 80, which was a bad period, otherwise it was definitely 4% plus. But it started increasing. In 80s, it increased further. 90s, it increased further. And over the whole period, in many other developing countries had two types of volatility. One is the huge volatility in output. Except for extraneous reasons like war or oil shock, we didn't, and occasionally drought, we didn't have too much of internal mismanagement, or perhaps too much of internal management, whatever was the reason. We didn't have that type of, or hyperinflation of 200%, 300%. We didn't have that. But at the same time, there was a sort of a decade after decade, there is some sort of a self-accelerating growth, which is noteworthy. And also, over a period, less and less volatility, even the impact of drought or something like that. So these are the factors we have to look at when then we come to the present century. Basically, we're talking only about history. No problem. Then what happened is, let's say, but what we're talking of is in about 50 years, 1950s, in the 19th century, first 50 years, the per capita income was constant. From 1950s onwards, for about 30 to 40 years, the per capita income was growing at about 2%, with the GDP growing at about 3 to 4%. And later, by the time we got to the 21st century, we are talking of growth at about 7% per capita income with the GDP is 9. So for per capita income annually to grow from 0 in the 50 years to about 2%, and then you are talking of 6, 7, even now if you say 7% is 5%, or a little more than 5% of per capita growth. So in that sense, if you take a historical perspective, it's not something that we should be terribly unhappy on this count. I'm not talking of any other thing. But more importantly is that we used to have savings, we used to save about 10% of GDP. And now the savings are over 30%. So if you have at least two things, the savings are increased and savings and investment are related. So if you are able to invest 30% plus of investment, and therefore the growth will have to be reasonably good unless we totally muck up. So we are a higher growth project. We may muck up in two ways. We may muck up in mismanaging, or we may muck up by doing policies which will reduce the savings. So this is something very often we forget, and people keep talking, reduce the interest rate so that growth is spread, as though it's only the interest rate that will produce growth without the savings. So I think that balance I want to just put it in. Particularly, MBA students seem to believe lower the interest rate, higher the growth rate. But the lower the interest rate, over a period there may be lower savings, so you don't have any money to get to invest. So that balance is required. And that's what macroeconomics teaches. Now, where did we take the journey? We took a journey soon after independence. India was virtually the leader in terms of thinking about development economics. India was the leader. We were one of the earliest to get independence. We had a lot of intellectuals, and it was a thought leader for the whole developing world. Then growth sort of stalled after 60s and 70s. 80s, yes, sort of picked up, but we had vulnerabilities. External debt was high, domestic debt was high, and we got into 91 problem. Then comes beginnings of 21st century. So once we are at the beginnings of 21st century, everybody felt that India is doing well. India was doing well. And from 2003 to 2008, to about 9%, increased at 5%, and we are even now second fastest growing economy. But a limited point again I want to emphasize is some of particularly more recent literature seems to indicate that 91 there was a reform and we are growing at 9%. No. The IITs were not established after 1990, which produced the leaders. The IIMs were not established after 1991, which produced the leaders. They are produced established not before. So whatever is happening now, India shining, India growing, India number 2, it was built over 50, 60 years since independence by a variety of things, including institutional development. So that's the limited point I want to make. Now, how does the present look like? As I mentioned, 2003, 2008, good, 8%, 8.9% growth, inflation 5%, forex reserves 300 billion, total external debt in 2008 I think was less than 200 billion or something like that, not more than more. And then financial sector was fairly strong. Comes the crisis, the global economic crisis. So when the global economic crisis came, yes, India was affected, but far less than most other economies, partly because the financial sector was strong, reasonably strong, and we had, there were not what they call imbalances, where the USA had consistently large current account deficit. They had to depend on the rest of the world too much. China was generating a lot of current account surpluses, so they were depending, whether exporting or importing too much. So there is a dependence in that sense. And therefore, they had to also correct after the crisis, their correction is required. So correction of imbalances is rebalancing. The rebalancing may be required between savings and investment because that's what represents the current account deficit. But if it is deficit or surplus, the rebalancing required. That's a policy challenge. We didn't have that much of rebalancing to do. Nor internal rebalancing like Eurozone. Though zone as a whole, there is no need for rebalancing. The second aspect which is more important is deleveraging. Like USA, you have too much debt by households, by government, even before by government. So you have household budgets, you have government budget, and also corporate budget, the financial sector budget. So there are some countries in which there is a need for deleveraging. There are some countries in which there is a need for rebalancing. In some countries there is a need for both. In India we didn't have either. And therefore we started from a fairly strong position to withstand the crisis in 2008. That is why the expectations also were very high. Then what happened? After that, in the last 2 to 3 years, 5 important things have happened, which is giving rise to this sort of not so great optimism. One is a slowdown in GDP. The second is the inflation is up. Third, financial savings and investment have started moderating. Financial savings are coming down. People seem to prefer putting money in gold or sand rather than bank account. Is it surprising? If the inflation is 10%, if the bank is giving you interest of 5%, you are losing 5% every year. And on top of it, you pay tax also. If you get capital gains by playing in the stock market. And therefore, people are developing. So you don't have financial savings for people to borrow and invest. So that's one. And then the external sector got weakened, partly because of global problems. And then the global uncertainties. Euro is in problem, China, you read about all that. So in a way, therefore, we have these 5 challenges: global uncertainties, financial savings and investment is moderating, it was always going up in the last 30 years. And then you have the inflation is up and GDP is a bit down. So yes, in a way, compared to many other countries, we may not be that bad, but the fact remains that compared to what we need to do, we have problems. Now there are 2 ways of looking at it, and this is where you have to be. Some people say, no, this is all because of the global crisis. And some people say, no, it is essentially domestic. What's your hunch? How many will lift the hands global crisis? How many of you think it's global crisis? How many of you think it's domestic? Right, I think I prepared the ground already. Because when we started, we were relatively better than most other countries. Because we didn't have deleveraging problem, we didn't have rebalancing problem. And we started with a comfortable savings and investment level also. So yes, it is essentially domestic. But having said that, it doesn't mean that global uncertainties are not a serious problem. Why? Why do you think global uncertainty is a big problem?
We are actually a lot of linkage with the rest of the world in the form of capital inflows and the oil imports.
That is not very complicated for me. I am a simple man. When you are domestically weak, global uncertainties will hurt you more. Simple. If your domestic economy is weak, you are more vulnerable. And what did we learn just now? We said the problem is essentially domestic. Simple. So, we may not be so vulnerable in the normal course of global uncertainties. We may not be deleveraging, but obviously the fiscal situation, the signals are such, and therefore we have to be sensitive to the global uncertainty. Now, what is this global outlook in the short run? So I suppose that's what it is now we have to look at. See, in the short run, I won't go into the details of particular Indian economy at this stage. One is, you should expect volatility in commodity markets, global commodity markets. In particular, oil. We are dependent very much on the import of oil, and to some extent fertilizer. Food perhaps not that well, but anyway. Why do you think the prices in commodity markets will be volatile? Pardon? Yes, geopolitical, oil market itself. Second, no, the exchange rate, we are not getting into the exchange rate part. We are talking about global economy, volatility in commodity, whatever it is denominated, volatility. You see, exchange rate also, let me quickly mention, there are 2 opposing forces. which are operating, apart from geopolitical. Again, two opposing forces. One, if there is a moderation in the growth in advanced economies, which is expected this year, global economy is likely to slow down. USA is picking up slightly, Japan is almost same, Europe is in problem. So you have all the leading economies where they are, and then China is also sort of stalling, and most of the developing economies, and you know that global economy is slowing. If the global economy is slowing, and in particular, where there is a lot of energy consumption, if those advanced economies are slowing, what happens to the demand? Therefore, the prices should be moderated. But there is huge liquidity to push the economies up. Huge liquidity is being injected by USA and Europe on an assured basis for the next 2 years. Guaranteed low interest money. So you go and play in the commodity markets. So the financialization of commodity markets means that with this type of cheap money assured for 2 years, you will go and play in the commodity markets. And therefore, you will find a lot of two opposing forces. Moderation demand, excess liquidity operating, and geopolitical uncertainties. You will find huge volatility in the commodity markets. Financial markets, definitely huge volatility, because you have got 3 or 4 crises happening in Europe, interrelated: banking crisis, or financial sector, fiscal crisis, and then you have got the exchange rate problems. What the currency you want to choose? Long run dollar will go down, short run dollar is the only safe haven. And you have European currency, you don't know what will happen to that currency. Renminbi is trying to advance, but it's advancing in commodity trade, but not in financial markets. So you have to, you just have, apart from the way the policy challenges that are happening. The financial markets want fiscal austerity. The real economy wants fiscal expansion, because there is no employment. If you just see the enormous divergences that are happening between different markets and their different intellectual positions, different interests. So financial markets, one problem. There will be volatility in financial markets also. You are seeing it, you will see more of it, guaranteed. 3, there is also a divergence in the sense that the advanced economies are slowing down. Developing economies are, but the type of challenges are different. Advanced economies are afraid of deflation. Developing economies are afraid of deflation. And now you have to globally coordinate. That's not going to be easy. Okay. So you will find many such diagrams. And then, most important for managers of the policy makers of the developing economies is that normally we assume certain problems, will call for certain responses, and therefore we will have to do something. That's how we see global economy, basic, and analyze. Now the advanced economists are saying there are huge problems, so we will take unconventional measures. So if somebody says I will take unconventional measures, it means they don't know what to do. But they will do something. But that's something which we don't know, and they also don't know today, but they will discover tomorrow. The problem is, if they are taking unconventional measures, I have no problem except that there is a spillover. If USA prints more dollars, then it just spill over to us. We are at the receiving end. If European Central Bank gives an assurance of some policy or suddenly takes some other measure, it is going to affect us, because the spillover effects of the monetary policies of the advanced economies are huge. So it may be a small change for them, but for us it's a big impact. And therefore, when there are unconventional policy measures by advanced economies, we must also think of unconventional policy measures. Right? So, so this sort of gives the current picture. Is that okay? You want me to talk faster or slower? Is it okay? Now let me quickly go to the long-term prospects in this bank. I think I say that the rebalancing in the broader sense, there are 3 types of rebalancing. I'm talking of 5-10 years by the time you become general managers, MD. See, the process, that the rebalancing where people thought earlier, oh, the government mucks up everything, and therefore we should allow the markets to operate, Reagan, Mrs. Thatcher, whatever it is. But suddenly we find that the financial markets have collapsed. Market ideology resulted in large-scale unemployment, a lot of political problems, social cohesion issues, number of issues have come. People are no longer sure. But the market said that the regulators who didn't know the job. The regulators say the financial markets were not even telling us the truth then. So the fact remains, it is that the old assumption that when the state fails, when the market fails, the state can correct. When the state, if state fails, depend on the market, is not correct. What is reality is how they interact. Both of them can join to make things worse. Our standard assumption, state failures, market failures, no, state and market, how do they interact with each other? How do you rebalance that position? That is the search now. So you can't conclude because China is a socialist, but actually all their prosperity is after accepting market logic. But when USA and UK went towards the market logic, they collapsed. Then you have Canada and Australia who still have market logic, they are not collapsed that much. Then you have got Northern Europe where the social welfare is high and taxes are very high, they are still reasonable. So the idea capitalism has failed is not necessarily true because like in ice cream, there are many flavors and colors for capitalism also. So it depends on what suits what circumstance. Now, but the point is, in the global economy, there will be a rebalancing between state and market. That's the limited point I want to make. Our knowledge of the balance between the state and market has to be questioned. And we have to watch what happens. Second, the balance between real and finance, there will be rebalance. The way the financial sector expanded, it expanded as a multiple of global trade, global finance. It expanded as a multiple of the real economy growth. So finance was supposed to help the real economy. The assumption was made that finance will lead the real economy, and finance actually led the real economy to collapse after taking you through a boom. So now that means that you have to really relook at the relationship between the real and the financial sector. That's going to happen in the world. That's going to happen. Second rebalance. I'm talking longer term. Shorter term I mentioned to you, deleveraging. There's the third area. And the third area is the national and global. Everybody thought global finance is good, but global finance is, as Martin King said, banks are global in life, but national in death. Because they may be global, but when there's a collapse in the national government, which has to. And then you have financial institutions who are too big to regulate, to fail. But they are not talking of those who are too big to save, as it happened in Ireland. Or there are some who are too big to regulate. They're not being discussed, but those are the facts. So the whole issue therefore is, what will be the, and I told you some of the contradictions between, or divergences between different countries. So is there a global governance? If there's no global governance, can there be global regulation? If there's no global regulation, can there be global finance? What will be the tensions? How are you going to readjust the national sovereignty, public policy? And today people demand better employment from the national government. And is there a global government to go and say this should be the public policy? It's only national government. People look to national government because the legitimate government is only national government. But technology is driving towards globalization. Economics also is driving towards globalization. So you have to find your mechanisms. You must provide either broader public space or space for public policy at national level, or you must have effective global arrangement. This current situation is unsustainable. There is a third rebalancing. And there is a fourth, that big rebalancing that's likely to happen. How many more minutes? 10, 15 minutes? Because of the demography. The combination of demography and a capacity for technology to percolate and spread. So that the technology can easily percolate and spread, everybody is able to quickly get hold of that compared to earlier days. And when you can do that, then the more the number of people, more they are able to produce and more they are able to consume. Therefore, I'm assuming that the skills are reasonably same. Of course, skill difference is important, but the fact remains that Asia is going to account for huge labor force. So the economic activity perforce the shifts here. Once the economic activity shifts here, this rebalancing economic activity, also maybe financial activity, maybe political, maybe so many things have to happen. And that shift is another balance, especially in the context of national global thing, because the existing global institutions are controlled by the West, which is declining. And in the future, if Asia is going out, then they require greater clout. And those who are holding on to the present institutions will not easily give place to new set of players. So you are going to see in the next 20 to 30 years, perhaps in the next 10 years itself, this type of rebalancing that is occurring, so which you have, it has a big picture. Now, more specifically, what will happen? One, let us take the shifts, various shifts. The shift in demography. When there is a shift in demography, huge shift comes here. But you still require some non-tradable services. You do require all the old people in Europe may require some medical care people or nurses to take care of them. So they have to go from here. In other words, what happens is when there are such a huge demographic shifts in the modern world, then it is possible, and maybe it's even inevitable, that there will be huge migration, which has happened in history also. And when the migration happens, it has to be managed unless there is a global government. So the migration, and don't think we have migration from India to America, it can be from Bangladesh to Calcutta also. So two things. One, the issue of managing the migration will be a global problem. The issue is not only managing migration from developing to advanced, but also between the emerging economies. One, demography and migration. Second, what about the capital? This is up to people. There is a new ballgame. You agree there is a new ballgame? With regard to the labor? Because India is slightly different. Why? Why? India's demographic transition is straight line. In other words, in China, all the people one child population, one child policy, and all of them get same time goal. In Europe, all of them became very civilized within 10, 20, 30 years, and therefore all of them will again become old. In India, Kerala stagnant, UP growing, Tamil Nadu close to stagnant. So in other words, India is having huge demographic diversity in terms of the stage in which each state is the same. So that way, India will be an island of stability in terms of demographic transition, which is unique among the large countries. USA, because of their own migration policies, there could be one. So this is one minor. Now, how about capital? What do you think will happen to capital? Anybody guess? Pardon?
It will flow to Asia.
It will go to?
Asia and the emerging economy.
It will go into? No, opposite. Opposite. It will go uphill. Because older people, they will consume, they can't produce, no? It will go uphill. Only people will. You see, that is, there will be effect, there will be dissonance there. So the idea that China had to fund American consumption, and last 4 or 5 years, the globalization of finance. You see, if you look at the globalization of finance, the assumption for globalization of finance was that advanced economies will produce enough money for developing economies to fund their development. All our friends who talk of FDI, FII, they are proceeding on the assumption that we will get money from advanced economies to grow. It did happen. Most of the developing world has financed the consumption of advanced economies in the last 4 years. And many people thought, and many people think, that that was an aberration. My submission is it may not be an aberration. It may be so in future. It may also keep going up. Because they have to consume. They have to say, they will sell their assets. We may go and buy the companies, but the money will go there, it won't come here. New ball game on labor, new ball game on capital. 3, economic activity. Economic activity will shift from advanced to developing into Asia perhaps, but more important within developing. Because you have got natural resources, you have got demand, you have got supply. So if you are thinking of setting up a business, stop thinking of USA and UK, start thinking of Indonesia, Vietnam, or South Africa, or Zambia, Gambia, okay? And that's where action will have to be. That's where resources, that's where population will go, supply will go, demand. If you are talking 30-year perspective, right? Okay. But there is a sort of a problem, in the sense where is the, what I may call, intellectual capital of the world? Where is it concentrated? West. Not this, basically West, Europe, USA, West. So does the intellectual capital shift as quickly as labor or capital? So that will be another concern. You will find economic activity shifting, and you will find intellectual capital remaining there. You will find institutional capital remaining there, because we are not in the institution. Capacity to absorb shocks. They are highly sophisticated systems. Capacity to absorb shocks. And finally, when the global economic power shifted, I am not talking of economic power, when the global economic power shifted from Europe to USA, it was not much of a cultural difference. USA was an extended arm of Europe. Culture, religion, race, these will be huge differences. So one thing is our economic activity to shift. The other is the economic power to shift. If both of them don't converge, then there is a problem. Now this is the stuff of, so in a way, what I'm saying is that don't read old books, start writing new books. That will be the charter for you. Having said that, now let me come to the strengths for future of India. I think here I need not explain much, because you know I'm only inviting your attention to that. One, I mentioned no overhang of the financial sector problem to start with now. Savings and investments are still high, as mentioned, by global standards. In fact, household savings are as high and sometimes higher than even China. The government is savings. Savings and investment balance I mentioned to you. Domestic and external demand is better balanced, I explained to you. Demography is giving dividend. Later I will tell you on conditions under which it will give dividend. I explained that demographic transition is stretched. It's not stopped in its own. But private sector has capability for innovation. Partly because they have to innovate, otherwise they can't survive. If you can't get power, you can't get water, you have to innovate to survive. So that's how the private sector is. As somebody commented, the cost per unit of output is lowest in China. The cost per unit of innovation is the lowest in India. So this is the question of innovation, but how long it will continue, we do not know. And I would say that fairly strong thing is the empowerment of women. Women who constitute this huge workforce which could enter the labor force, and huge educational opportunities have come. For instance, in Andhra Pradesh, at least 40% of the engineering graduates are women, 35 to 40%. And 150,000. People say quality is up. Well, quality is good, at least 20% will be good enough. So you have, I mean, 20% of men will be good enough. But I think this is an important point, that there's no class ceiling. In many other societies, including Japan, there's a class ceiling, so we don't have class ceiling. Of course, there are other problems. If you look at 45, 50 years hence, then there is the other problem. You won't have population. Especially the more the educated are the women, the population, the drop in the population growth is heavy. Singapore is already facing a huge problem, and France is facing it. So that's next generation problem. So you may have difficulty in finding grandchildren. Now, but one advantage that India has in some senses is its huge capacity to manage diversity. See, the type of things I mentioned, the world is going to have very diverse situations, diverse cultures trying to manage diverse economic situations, very diverse. And they're forced to be together because of technology. In that situation, the mental makeup as well as the institutional setup should understand how to manage diversity. And I think India specializes in somehow surviving with diversity, whether effectively and ineffectively. And there is no other state. Many things that Europe is trying to struggle is what we have been struggling. So many language, nation states, and there are many parallels. I don't want to go into it. Those of you who are interested, you must read the debates in the Constituent Assembly of India. In fact, I told the Conference of Europeans that if you want to know how to manage European Union, please read the debates in the Constituent Assembly of India. Because we face this attack. What federation should be structured, which can last? What type of fiscal arrangements should we have? What type of challenges? Anyway, so, we also have potential to learn from the experiences, the crisis which we provided, whether it's Asia or the West. Then what are the challenges? The demographic dividend can be a demographic disaster. Why?
Lack of education.
Pardon?
Lack of education.
Lack of skills.
If you do not have globally competitive skills, you'll have a lot of young people who don't know what to do. Bad enough having young people who don't know what to do. It is worse to have young people who know what to do at all, right? So basically, the future of India, let me put it this way, the future of India lies in UP, Bihar, MP, and Rajasthan. Simple. Demographic dividend comes from there for the next 30, 40 years. If the youth of India are from UP, MP, Bihar, and they have to be globally competitive with the workforce of USA, Netherlands, China, and Germany. So either they are at it or there will be a disaster. 1. 2. The manufacturing sector is the one which provides employment for not so skilled labor. Services is, some services is higher. So how exactly do you marry these services and manufacturing to develop global competitiveness in manufacturing? See, if you see our external data, external sector data, there is a huge trade deficit. What does huge trade deficit mean? We import more goods and we export less goods. Which essentially means, of course you can remove oil, but oil also is in some ways to produce good, and you can have substitute energy. Essentially you have outsourced manufacturing and insourced services. It may work well for IT professionals, but it may not work well for the huge demographic dividend and everything. So this could be an issue. And the third is and those of you who get to read social indicators, we are pretty low. Normally we are 139th out of 140 or something. Education, health, infant mortality. And physical infrastructure is terribly inadequate by global standards. The business environment is very poor. The number of poverty-stricken people, absolute poverty is the highest in the world. There is huge concentration of poor people. The expected urbanization is huge, and you can see Calcutta itself. And more of urbanization requires huge public policy intervention. We don't have it. The climate, we are not counting when you calculate GDP 9%, this GDP 9% is after destroying the forests. So if you deduct for that, the GDP growth may be minus in some cases. So basically, the point is the accounting is not able to factor in the damage done to the capital. The possible shortage of water in India may face huge shortage of water. And I was jokingly saying that we should get an agreement with Canada to import water. Canada will be a country which will have maximum water. And we may have the most active, even Middle East may be better than us, the way according to some projections are. And of course, the standard economist argument is middle income trap. So when you can go up to middle income and then from there go into that easy. So these are the challenges. So you have got opportunities, you have got strengths, you have got challenges. It will be a little more challenging than what we thought at the beginning of the lecture. Is it okay? Now let me say a few things about your future. There also you have a lot of good news and a bit of bad news. Yes, India will be a land of opportunities because I don't envisage a growth of rate of less than 7% on the medium to long term, given the population growth, given saving, investment balances, the possibilities of overall it should be 7%, maybe a little more plus, not much more minus. And it will be second fastest growing large economy in the world for your generation virtually. And if you do well, maybe you will be the fastest growing. But relative to the earlier 10 years back IIM graduates, you may have a lot more opportunities to live and work in India. A lot of economic activity will be here. Rather than look only to go out to make a living, you will have that. And India will be more globalized, and therefore you will have more global opportunities also. There will be more competition to people in India, especially from China and other Asian countries. So those of you who want to learn Chinese, please start doing so. There's one business school at least which has made Mandarin compulsory in India. Great Lakes. Okay, huh? So you better persuade your faculty to get some classes run in the IIM premises. You have already? Oh, good. All of you are learning? Good. Okay. I'm just jokingly saying. The point is global. Whether it is based on Spanish is equally possible. Swahili possible. Then I would say that Indian businessmen, those of you who are aspiring to business, Indian businessmen will have opportunities globally. The way I look at it is that there will be opportunities for acquiring assets in advanced economies and doing business in emerging market economies. The economic activity will be higher, and since the advanced economies partly are in trouble in the next few years, and over longer term, they will have to import capital somehow or other, it's quite possible. So in a way, I would strategically look at acquiring assets, and that way even penetrating into intellectual and institutional capital of advanced economies, and take advantage of that in order to expand business where the population is expanding. And within India, you will definitely have in two areas, social infrastructure, education and health for at least 30 or 40 years, and physical infrastructure, energy, water, etc. So you will have better standards of living for yourself and your children and your grandchildren. But the big problem, the two problems. One, the big problem is that in advanced economies, the young people are suffering from fear. In advanced economies, the young people are fearful, the unemployment in some economies like Spain, younger people is 30 to 40%. They don't expect to be globally competitive to do the same task here once you get globally integrated. So, and they are not sure whether, the old people are not sure whether they will have enough health care. The old people are not sure whether their pensions are protected. So the young of the advanced economies are suffering from fear. The young of the emerging developing economies like India are having hope. And both have to be reconciled in a global economy. Two, there's a bigger danger. The bigger danger is that what is it that many of the young generation today aspire? If you want to reach the standards of living of USA, and you try to do that, India will collapse, the planet will collapse. The amount of natural resources that you have to draw on a per capita basis. So, if the youth from the IIM have the ambition of copying US standards of living, your children or grandchildren may not be as happy. Thank you very much.
Now for the question and answer session, Dr. Reddy would you like to ask some questions? You have been asking. It's going to give you more opportunities to ask to do some questions.
No, that's it. Yes.
So, I think it's a free for all.
So, you said that population is an asset, right? In terms of because we have a favorable demographic dividend.
It could be an asset.
It could be an asset. But the sheer size of the population that we have, we definitely have the challenges of meeting the primary and secondary needs, right? And so, in this regard, would you say that the really population is an asset or it's a burden in the future?
I think that's where we economists, when we are young, we go back to Malthus, of course. There's a debate now going on whether Malthus will come back being relevant. But in a very restricted sense, yes, 30, 40 years ago, we thought population is a problem, and therefore you have to somehow control the population. But if you see the history of the various countries that have come up, it's not the population that is the problem, but the way in which somebody very, early on when I was young actually as a research scholar, I was traveling in a train, and at that point of time I was arguing about Malthus and population problem, and there was a strategy who was traveling with me, and he said in his broken Hindi, you don't understand, for every mouth God has given two hands. No joke, you don't understand. There's one mouth, but there are two hands. All you have to do is learn how to use those two hands. The two hands can feed more than one mouth. And I didn't take it seriously, but it started. But it took another 20, 30 years of learning economics to know. Maybe he was right. So now, in the literature, increasingly in the literature, people are saying that that it is the demography that can. In fact, some people like Surjit Balla go to the extent of saying the growth of most of the world economies can be explained in terms of demography. I won't go to that extent. But definitely the question is the amount of productive workforce provides a source of production, and it also provides a source of demand. So in that sense, it's a dividend. But as I explained, if we are not able to find adequate employment opportunities, then it could be a disaster. It could be a disaster.
So, how long can we sustain a government in which less than 40% of the people pay taxes and remaining 60% in the farming sector, even the rich farmers don't pay a single penny and they get benefits out of us? So, isn't there a time like, do we need to tax even at least the rich farmers who actually earn more than what IT sector employee earns 20,000, but a rich farmer might be earning a lakh, more than a lakh. So isn't it the right time to tax at least farming sector at some point of the time?
There are two questions there, as I say. One, of course, is whether taxation is regressive. Yes, it is regressive. Whether it's a problem, yes, it's a problem. Obviously, it's such a big problem that even Warren Buffett says, please tax me more. Can you ever heard of a rich man say, tax me more? That means capitalism is under threat. That's just what it means. It means that there is a serious problem. And that's what it is. So what you say is a problem. You cannot have a situation. And the question of inequality is in a way result of globalization. Now increasingly there is a recognition that the model of economic development that was adopted globally, whether it is in India, whether it is in USA, whatever the model, China, forget about the level of development today, forget about the level of development, forget about the system of development, capitalism, communism, China, India, Singapore, whatever it is. Huge inequality, not just. So it's a big problem. And we economists are not able to comprehend how to design. We always feel inequality is something which has to add on problem. Add on. You first develop the whole model and see how you can manage inequality. But obviously the model itself is generating inequalities, and therefore we may have to deal with the model. So in that sense, you're right. On the second, I don't agree with you. Actually, real farming activity does not produce The farmer may be doing trading, something else. If you do proper accounting of farming, most of the farming, I'm not talking about the estates, most of the farming, if you do proper accounting of farming, you will not be able, apart from how much you get. Let me explain on agriculture, very simple fact. The 20 wealthiest Indians account for a wealth, according to Dr. Jala, which is more than 20% of GDP of the country. And total value added by agriculture is 50%. Most of the agriculture actually is done by small and marginal farmers who are doing it not because it is profitable, but they are bonded. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. They don't know other opportunities. And therefore, if at all, and then to say that you can get capital gains, you can get 10,000 crores income and you don't pay income tax. And you go and tell the farmer, I won't give you water, though I tell you I'll give you water. I won't give you power, though I'll tell you give power. I'll charge you for both. I'm subsidizing fertilizer, but he doesn't get the subsidy. I don't know what quality of seed you have to take. And then you pay taxes, you will be big now. I'm not sure. Many of us don't understand the agrarian crisis. And you are ending up with a situation where you have food inflation, still farmers are, in Andhra Pradesh there's a district where farmers said we will not farm anymore. Stop, we will not produce. They're going on strike. So we have to be careful. The problem with agriculture today is that if there's one crisis India is facing, it's an agrarian crisis. Because agriculture, I think those of you who are interested, please study agriculture as a unit of production. Is it a viable unit of production? That's all. Ultimately, if you want something to be produced, if you want bottles to be produced, you will analyze whether it is economical to produce bottle. Unit of production or micro. Please examine whether as a unit of production, how many agricultural units are viable. So our whole approach to agriculture, I may be wrong, but that study has not been undertaken. Agriculture is taken as given, fellows are there, the land is there, they have to cultivate, and they have to give more, they will give more credit. At this time, again, I'll come to, when I joined as governor, I come from rural background, if I may put it that way. We wanted to do something, and I mentioned to the Prime Minister, to Finance Minister, that agriculture has to be included, etc. I said, credit. I said, sir, credit is not the issue. I can give credit, but there's no risk against, there's no mitigating any risk. He's not sure of water, he's not sure of power, he's not sure of fertilizer and its quality, he's not sure of seed which is quality, he's not sure of the price. And and especially now the value of the land thanks to SCs, etc. has gone up. So nobody will go and invest some money. If it is useful as a unit of production, tell me any one of you, I'll get you for lease 20 acres of land wherever you want for the next 10 years, go and produce. If what you say is true, you can make lakhs and no tax. Tell me. So that micro study has not been done. So when I think the statistics will prove that, I explained and I said, that's it, there's no problem. We will. They said double the credit in 5 years, no problem. You can give credit, but you give credit to unviable sector, you will not get it back. But I did it. In less than 5 years, we doubled. In the 5th year, we wrote off. You read the annual report. I'm not saying anything out of my hat, it's there. And that 65,000 crores write-off was criticized by the whole world. The tax exemption, every year, is 10 times better. You just read the budget document, taxes for them. And I have no problem, at least if you are able to say I have given tax exemption to SCZ, because I have given exemption to SCZ, so many thousands of employment has been created. Is there any statistic available? How many people benefited? What's the per capita subsidy? So I think this idea that, oh, that fellow is getting subsidy, simple. When a poor man gets something, it is called subsidy. When a rich man gets something, it is called incentive.
So so we talked about this farming issue, and I think the most important issue I think over here is the very large number of people who are dependent on them. So in order to drive people out from that sector, or I mean, driving out is not the best word here, but in order to make people dependent on other this thing, I mean, what kind of steps can India as a government take on, like, where do you see the policies being changed so that
No, absolutely. What you are right is that twofold effort that's required. One is you have to improve the agriculture productivity so that the misery in agriculture, reduce the risk. First I would say reduce the risk. Have mechanisms where there is risk mitigation. Then second, yes, make it more. Definitely there is huge scope for increasing the productivity. Third, the supply chain. So basically the problem is all the institutional setup. I don't want to give, the institutional setup, the supply chain. To give you an example, like the milk, the milk that is paid by Amul for the milk, the difference between that price and the sale price is the smallest in the world. And it's cooperative, done by millions of people. So it's not that cooperative is wrong, but accept that the cooperative should be run by the people. Now we have got a cooperative institutional framework. So the whole institutional framework is not oriented to increasing productivity. There has been no reform in agriculture. We are talking of liberalizing trade globally for increased efficiency. Is trade in agriculture liberalized in India? You tell me one reform that has happened from 1991 for agriculture. So first, reform agriculture. From basics, how to make that unit of production. It's not in terms of rich landlord, poor landlord. It doesn't matter, you're not landlord, take a small farm. The real problem is small farm. Most of the landlords are not cultivating land any longer. Okay. Number two, you are right, there is no way 50% of the population can depend on agriculture. So where will they go? Will they become IT specialists? That is why manufacturing. No? That's why you have manufacturing commission, and I think the director of the IIM is involved. That is why you have to do a lot more. That's why you have to marry. You see, the services are embedded in manufacturing nowadays. Therefore, we should use the capacity that we have in services to imbibe that services advantage into manufacturing, gain manufacturing advantage. So that's the type of strategy. That's why the government has appointed a commission. Now, what the commission, that's different, but at least it's an intellectual matter. My problem about saying anything more serious is I have been a party to all this, I say. For 40 years I have been. So, whenever I laugh at the government, I have to laugh at myself because I have been there for 25 years. But it's a fact that something has to be done more.
So even in the case of manufacturing, like, I mean, at the level of, say, the kind of manufacturing that occurs in, say, countries like China, where it's almost completely cost-based, and we can't compete on the same level because of the kind of labor laws, or let's just say that we are a democracy and we can't do things the way it's done in China. So where do you see that heading?
No, I think somewhere nobody thought that we will do well in IT either. So nobody thought we can even produce cheese in India. Amul did produce with its own. So I think we have to. But the more important thing, now that you raise about public policy, I want to say that people do seem to think that the problems are to be sorted with public policy. What about governance in the private sector? Do you mean to say economy can grow with improving the governance in the public sector? What's the state of governance in the private sector? What's the state of governance? Do the Indian people have faith in the Indian share market? The percentage of retail, the percentage of financial savings by Indians into equity markets is falling with greater financial sector reform. That is the extent of confidence that we have. I don't know how much money of the FII is really coming through some other route. So we have to be careful in thinking that the problems of Indian economy will be solved by changing in public policy. And this is a debate which I have been flagging, saying that look, the issue is one of governance in private sector as much as in public sector. There cannot be corruption unless there is a bribe giver and a bribe taker. And you cannot tackle one different from the other, except in some retail things as coffee bars. Thank you.
I think take just two more questions and we'll.
When you mentioned about economic activity shifting from west to the east, right? has to shift. But don't you see rising unemployment rates in general in the West as a challenge that would hamper this?
Definitely, this is what I said, that is the type of tension that will happen. In fact, it's quite possible that globalization will be advocated by developing countries and protectionism may be adopted by advanced countries. Because they require time. You see, it's very easy for my economist friends to say, the problem is increase the productivity. As though increasing productivity is like writing a research paper into a document. Increasing productivity is something that's not more difficult. So therefore, that's going to be a challenge. I agree. That's going to be the biggest challenge. In fact, very interesting. 10 years back, the problem was that the developing countries are resisting globalization because they don't have a choice. Now the developing countries are equipped to handle globalization, thanks to the dissemination possibilities of technology. Wide dissemination possibilities of technology, capacity to adopt, and minimum skills that have been obtained. Now you have a situation where they are absolutely right. You have a problem.
But then, what measures can a developing country take to?
I mean, not that I know the answer to that. But
last question.
So you talked about the shift of power from economic power from the west to the east to India.
Economic activity. I thought every time I was using activity.
You also use your power.
They're different.
No power is no.
If I didn't express myself properly, I will repeat it. The shift of economic activity is inevitable. Shift of economic power is questionable.
Yes, sir. So my question is on that one.
Difficult. What is going to happen? But it will be bumpy when it happens. Unlike from Europe to US.
So for that, probably will require is the brain that exists in West, as you said, to also shift to India and other Eastern countries.
Yes.
But at the same time, you said that standard of living in India, we should not expect it to go up with the Western standards.
Yes.
So how do you expect India to attract that kind of brain in the coming years?
I think greatest discoveries were not made by those who were paid highest in the world. The concept that innovation comes. This again goes back to the patent regime. The patent regime is because you want to. You wait and see the moment it shifts here, the global patent regime will be forced to change. It's a way of handling power. You have intellectual power, so you want to create rent out of intellectual power. Therefore, the patent regime comes. It's part of the game. That's why I repeat it. When the economic power comes, you can dictate terms. When I discover patent, so the whole it is a game. But to think that people who work hard, I'll conclude. But before I conclude, I would insist at least no lady has ever questioned any question here. I talked of empowerment of women. What's happening? See, any question? Then I want to end with a joke. Okay. No, ladies. There are no lady friend to make her person give the same question.
Come on. Don't disappoint us, Reddy.
You said like you laugh at yourself if you have to laugh at the government. Why can't you stop laughing at the government and yourself?
That's what I've done. I started and suddenly I stopped. I realized I shouldn't be laughing.
No, I mean in that sense, why can't we be better in terms of policy, in terms of implementation, in terms of governance? Why can't we be better?
Yeah, I know. As I said, it's collective. As I said, it's very difficult to. That's what I'm very careful in giving public interviews, comment on this. What can I comment? And in fact, you may recall that 10 eminent people signed, 10 or 12 people signed recently, Deepak Parekh, etc., etc. They're all my friends. And then they rang me up and they said, second was issued recently, 2-3 months back. Then they said what the government should do, etc. So they wanted to sign. They said, we'll send it to you. I said, no, I don't want to sign. How can I sign? I was there, just as you were there. Every one of the 10 people have been in their policy, either inside or advising. You tell me one of the 10 eminent persons, how do you become eminent unless you are involved in the government? Somewhere or other. Then I said, look, I was there for 30 years. And suddenly, just because I left 3 years back, now I can say, the economy is going to dogs. How do I do that? I'm a party to whatever is happening today. In some ways or other, I might have resisted. But I've been a party to that, number one. Number two, today, it's not as though I quarrel with the Prime Minister, Finance Minister, Governor. I can lift the phone and talk to the Governor. I can lift the phone and mention, say, I said, look, if I can meet the policymakers and tell them, I share my wisdom with them, they are not going to say no. Will they go public? What is the reason to go public, saying what the government should do? If I have been part of the government, today the government is prepared to listen to me when I tell in private also, then what is the public news necessary? That's why I didn't stand. There are answer to your question. It is better to keep quiet than see, we wanted, sir, I just mentioned about this discovery. See, this issue of SEBI chairman came at one stage, and Minister and I were looking for candidates. We should find the private sector. I said, yes, you should find private sector. So, said, you find, no problem. So, came back. I said, I'm trying, sir, how many people, nobody seems to accept. So I said, okay, and then you look for retired IAS officers who are in the private sector now, second best. So then he went round, then he came back, and he said, so now the fellows are coming, I said, what's happening, nobody wants to be the chairman, safety. I tried, sir, so what to do? He said, sir, why should they come? They won't come. He said, why? Sir, they can make money, they can abuse the chairman safety. Now, if you are chairman saying you take the abuse, you don't make money. I said, it is total irrationality. Then he looked at me. I'm like, actual truth, huh? He said, well, then why are you here as a governor RBI? I said 3 reasons. 1, addiction. 2, addiction. And 3, addiction. People who want to be creative, they are creative, they are innovative. The person who wants to market may require incentive. So how to create institutional factors which will convert innovation into, those are different things. So what I am saying is that it is the lure of wealth which drives innovation, or it cannot be right entirely. Of course, the greatest of the ideas were produced by Socrates, who never thought of making money, but ultimately he said it was like the ideas he made. So that's all. Thank you.
On behalf of all our students, where are they? Okay, it was a fantastic session, and I'm a big part of it because after your interaction with the students, their expectations of what they can get in a class. And I think very few of us will be able to actually come up to those expectations. So you have made actually the task very difficult for a whole bunch of people. Negative externality. I mean, right now there is a positive. But we must, all good things come to an end, and I think it was a fantastic interaction session. I don't remember too many sessions where so much interest from the students, and there were so many things that we learned from you. By the way, before he came for this lecture, we were sitting in the director's office and we were chatting, and I learned at least 5 entirely new facts from him, just in the course of casual conversation. Okay? So it's a unique resource we have here, and I think really enjoyed the session, and we can only hope that some other time we'll be able to visit Calcutta again. I would also like to thank the team members of Colloquia for arranging this session, for of course all of you for coming here and being a very enthusiastic part of all this. I would also like to thank one more person, Professor Parthore. Professor Parthore has been with the RBI for a very long time before he joined us, very close to Dr. Reddy also, and he has also really helped us in organizing the whole thing and coordinating with Dr. Reddy. So thanks to everybody, and of course a big thanks to Dr. Reddy, and we will probably meet him some other time. But I hope that a lot of the things that he said today is a very broad sweep of things. But things are moving at such a fast pace that I think some of these big trends have to be kept in mind. You'll all go out very soon, and you'll be part of this process going on in the global economy. And I hope that you continue to remember some of those things. And I'm pretty sure, sir, from what I teach, for example, I know that after 6 months, if anybody can draw the correct supply and demand curves, that's very fantastic. So, if they can identify that the downward sloping one is the demand curve and the upward sloping one is the supply curve.
In the normal circumstances.
Normal. There's plenty of things to think about and remember and apply. And when you look at many articles, newspapers, I was thinking of all of the things that you read in the Economics, so there was a lot of debunking of myths which went on today. I hope you realize that, and when you read some of the stuff being put out in the papers, very famous journals and so on, please keep some of these simple lessons in mind, and you'll be able to come to a lot of conclusion. So again, thank you, sir, and we come.